Welcome to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am Dr. Sharon H. Porter, host for this episode and member of the Black Doctoral Network. Today, I am joined by Dr. Cedric D Hue, patent attorney for D Hue Law, LLC. He has recently earned a PhD in Analytical Chemistry from Purdue University. Welcome to Black Doctors Talk podcast, Dr. D Hue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Porter. It truly is a pleasure to speak to you.
Absolutely. I would love for you to first start by telling our viewers and listeners a little about your background. Where does it start for you?
Yeah, great. So I pursued chemistry in undergrad, frankly, because I was pretty good at it. It wasn't easy, but I definitely didn't have to work at that subject matter as I did on others. I think that's because both of my parents are MDs. And so the talk at the dinner table was science-based, and I always did well in chemistry. I actually have a pretty funny story about it. In 8th grade at Camp Creek Middle School, we had a athletic as well as a academic Olympics, and I got first place for gold and for chemistry and as well as biology. And I did not do very well in the 200. I thought I was an excellent athlete, and they put me in one of the far out lanes, and I just, thought I was holding my own during the curve, and then the straightaway, everybody just left. They left me behind. So those two events at the same time said, yeah, Cedric, you probably should stick to chemistry.
I love that. So you got your start with biological and chemical patent law by earning your Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry. What was the motivation to pursue patent law?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because actually, and this is really something as a part of the reason why I wanted to do this, interview, because, we, especially African Americans, don't hear about patent law very early in our careers. We may hear about it like I did. I didn't hear about the PhD till I was already in a master's program. I didn't hear about patent law as a career choice until the master's program. And so when I finished my bachelor's degree, I worked for a year as a dissolution chemist as well as an analytical chemist for a generic pharmaceutical company. And the only thing I wanted to do was get out of that lab. I did not enjoy being in the lab and keeping a lab notebook and all of that stuff. So I looked and saw that the formulation chemists that I work with, as well as their boss, all had PhDs. And so I thought, okay, I'll go get a PhD then. It was during the master's program associated with that PhD is when I heard about patent law. I mean, this might be a good time to discuss what the requirements are to be a patent attorney.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so with a patent attorney, there's two parts to it. There's the patents and there's the attorney, right? And they are really two separate licensings. So first you have an attorney, means that you go to law school, you pass law school, you have a JD, and then you sit for that state bar exam. And if you pass the bar exam, then you are an attorney. You have to keep up your requirements and all that kind of stuff, but you are an attorney. Separate from that, the United States Patent and Trademark Office has a separate bar exam for patent practitioners. So if you are already an attorney and you pass that separate bar exam for the patent bar, then you are a patent attorney, simple enough. If you are a patent agent, you've passed the patent bar exam, but you have not become an attorney, right? Whether you've gone to law school or not. You could have the JD, but maybe you haven't passed a state bar exam. And so then you are a patent agent.
That's really interesting. Wow. So who has had an influence on you as an attorney?
Oh, there's a lot. So I'd say that, like, if I wanted to do a thorough job of this, I'd need to cover those who were mentors to me during my chemical path as well as my attorney path. There was an African-American woman who interviewed me for my application for Tufts University, where I went for my undergrad. And outside of her wonderful recommendation, I do not think I would have gotten in. While there was a graduate student who explained to me gas chromatography and mass spectrometry and was instrumental in me working for his PI over the summer. After I had my stint at the generic pharmaceutical company, there was a tenured professor in chemistry who who really fought to get me into that graduate school program. And there was another who gave me a shot at doing computational chemistry. There were a couple of big law patent attorney partners who helped me with my craft. My wife, especially when I left big law, she was thrust into the role of being a breadwinner. There was a technology manager who literally, he gave me my first patent matter. And he told me many years later that he just held his breath and prayed that I would not mess it up. And I did well. He convinced another technology manager to start sending me work, and I was off and running from there. My PI for my PhD, he gave me a research assistant position when I was married, working, and adding 4 children to my family while doing the PhD. A very stressful time. I do not want to do that again. And there's a local patent attorney here who consistently refers me work and has given me great advice. So there's a lot of people who have assisted me. I would say that there's a few things though that are, there's something more we could discuss with this that, maybe this is another good time to talk about it. There's a lot of misinformation out there though as well.
I'm sure there are. What are some of the things that we are misinformed about?
Sure. So one thing is I heard a case of a career counselor who spoke to an African-American STEM student and told the student that they couldn't use their STEM degree with a law degree together. It's just false information. There are a lot of career opportunities that blend STEM and the law. Everything from being a patent attorney like myself, a patent agent like we talked about before, a technical specialist. So we had Dr. Tucker from SkySong Innovations. He and I, as well as Dr. Tariana Stewart from Georgia Tech, gave a presentation during the last annual meeting about fostering innovation in underrepresented groups. You could become a USPTO examiner. That's the Patent and Trademark Office. You could be the one that picks up those applications that I draft and tell me no, which happens a lot. They'll say no until I convince them to say yes. You could be an expert witness, and you can, of course, be an inventor. So there are a lot of opportunities, and those are just the things where you're matching STEM with patent law. You could have other areas where you take your STEM degree and you use it with healthcare, with environmental law. There's a lot out there that you can do with a STEM degree as well as with a JD.
Wow, this is really fascinating. I really hope that you have the opportunity to talk to students, elementary, middle, and high school students about this, because this is the type of information that they need early on before even deciding what they're going to go to college for. So this is great information.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Porter. You raise an excellent point, because one of the papers that was cited by the USPTO's Success Act report is a paper by Alex Bell and others called Who Becomes an Inventor in America? And that's exactly what he did. He used census data as well as a lot of good demographic information, and he was able to show the inventorship rates for African-American students, third grade students versus Caucasian third grade students. And that paper was fundamental. Some of his recommendations are things that apply to me and it would apply to other children that are that age. One of his recommendations was that we really do need to identify African-American students from third grade and on who are doing very well subject matter-wise in STEM, and promote them and encourage them and move them forward, because his research shows that if you correct for parental income and you also correct for third grade test scores, you've covered about half of the gap between African-American students and Caucasian students. So the other half of the gap, of course, is he was not able to identify. We know what it is, but he was not able to identify. But that paper is fundamental for some of the research we'll be talking about later in this interview.
Wow, I love it. So let's discuss patents. What right does a patent provide, and how long does that patent protection last?
Okay, sure, yeah. So a patent is a right of exclusion. This is something that can be kind of confusing. It's not an affirmative right for you to do anything, like you to make something or to sell something or to import something into the jurisdiction where the patent is enforced. It's a right for you to exclude others. So a very simple example would be, Dr. Porter, if you have a patent, you'd have the right to exclude me from doing whatever are listed in the claims of that patent. And so that is what a patent does, right? Now, you're not going to apply, I might as well just go ahead and knock this out while we have a chance to do so. You don't have the ability to say, okay, I received a cease and desist, right? I received a cease and desist notice saying that I'm infringing someone else's patent. Well, I can't go out and get a patent and that's going to be my shield against patent infringement. No, it doesn't work that way. Since a patent is a right of exclusion based upon what you make, use, sell, or import, you have to look at what the person is making, using, selling, or importing, not what they're patenting. And that's really another point of confusion for a lot of individuals. So you have to, if you're the patent holder, you're looking at what the other party is making, using, selling, or importing. When you're the potential alleged infringer, we're not looking at your patent portfolio, we're looking at what you're doing. Oh, you had asked the other question too about how long does a patent last, and I forgot to cover that. So a patent term is no more than 20 years from the earliest filing, not including the provisional patent application, which gives you 1 additional year. So if you filed a non-provisional application today, and say it took you 3 years to get over that USPTO examiner we talked about before, then your maximum patent term would be 17 years. Okay. Now you have to do some additional things. There are maintenance fees you have to pay around 4 years after issuance, 8 years after issuance, and 12 years after issuance in order to keep that US patent in force. But once you have your issued patent, your maximum term can be the amount left after examination, after
up to 20. Wow, that's interesting. Okay. So we know that there are several areas of intellectual property, including copyright, trademarks, patents, as we've been talking, and trade secrets. Does your law firm work with all of those or only certain areas of intellectual property?
Sure. I mean, 95% of my work is patent preparation and prosecution, drafting applications, doing patentability searches, examining applications to issuance, just over and over and over again, bread and butter. Now, every once in a while, I will draft and file pretty straightforward trademark applications for registration. And once in a blue moon will I do a copyright application for registration. Now, trade secrets, there's no trade secret office, right? The whole purpose of a trade secret is to keep the information confidential. So while there are things you can do to keep that information confidential, think of Coca-Cola and all they do to keep that secret formula secret, but they don't have anywhere where that information is disclosed. So there isn't much for an attorney to do outside of drafting NDAs, confidentiality, non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, ensuring that policies and procedures do not allow for the release of information except for key employees who have to have it. So I don't do a lot of trade secret stuff. I'm really patent preparation and prosecution.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So what seems to be the biggest mistake business owners or inventors make when it comes to protecting their intellectual property?
Yeah, and I hope you allow me to jump on my soapbox here for a minute.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just in general, just to really answer the question, I do get contacted by a number of business owners after they've already had some sort of intellectual property issue. They've had some contractual agreement go awry. Think of, the owner who's working with another company and they work together on something and it goes great, but there are no contracts in place. I had one recently where the other party, as soon as they started working together, went ahead and filed an application. And so now my client is kind of in a difficult situation, trying to struggle to make sure that they are protecting what they feel is their contribution because those things were not done in the beginning. And that does happen, and that happens a lot. But now it's time for my soapbox, right? Because I think that the primary reason why we have that is because there are too many attorneys who are focused on working only with the wealthy clients, Fortune 500 companies. There's reports from the American Bar Association that over 60% of litigants in court are what are called pro se litigants, meaning that they are representing themselves and are not represented by an attorney. I mean, that's just incredibly high percentage because that really identifies that there's this lack of access to justice in that more than half of those that are in court are not represented by counsel because frankly, the attorneys just cost too much. There are a lot of companies like legal startups, LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer and all these things that are recognizing this gap, and they're going in there and trying to work through those issues. So the biggest issue that I really see is the way that the legal industry is structured. And we can get into that a little more in some of the later discussion, but I would think that right now, we should be, as a legal industry, focused on doing a lot of those automated process steps, a lot of providing products instead of always requiring to do services that are so time consuming. Because, can you imagine if, 60% of patients in a hospital tried treating themselves? I mean, you don't have that same sort of issue in the medical profession, because there are so many individuals who, from nurses to, physician's assistants to nurse practitioners, all the way up to the physician, that can address all of those issues. So you don't have patients in hospitals trying to treat themselves. The legal industry needs to do something similar, and I think it's with legal products.
So you mentioned the LegalZooms, the Rocket Lawyers, things of those nature. So those are legitimate avenues for individuals to use versus going to a traditional attorney?
They have their place. Now, if you are coming to a LegalZoom, LegalZoom is not a law firm, and so they are not going to provide legal services. Now, can states make this a little bit easier in that, say, LegalZoom is able to automate as many functions as an attorney needs, so the attorney is just spending time on the legal matter? That would be great, but we don't see that occurring. We see LegalZooms and Rocket Lawyer and stuff like that are arguing with state bar associations about, well, what can we do and what can those LegalZooms cannot do. Now, one thing I will suggest is I would stay away from those invention help companies completely. A lot of the time, their automated systems are such that you put in all the information and you don't even, I've had several clients that came to me because the invent help or whoever it is just completely missed steps of their process, and drafted an application that really did not provide any sort of value. So I would definitely stay away from those. There are some other things that other organizations are doing, like the United States Patent and Trademark Office has a pro bono clinic program, and similar programs and initiatives to try to reach out to those who are, not able to pay the full rate that an attorney charges. However, those programs still require attorneys to donate their time. And so there are limitations associated with those programs. My solution, which I think is probably the best, is that law firms need to integrate technology to automate their routine processes. And they need to allow the clients to dictate the amount of actual services needed relative to the products they provide.
Great information. So with everything that's coming and going, how do you stay abreast of the current trends that's happening in your field?
Sure, yeah. Primarily for me, it's listservs. It's getting on there, and there's one that I can think of. I can't even keep up with them. I mean, it's every, multiple times a day, someone raises some concept that's like way up here and they're just going through it and you're just kind of like following along. And that's really what I do, is I follow along. And this kind of goes back to our previous discussion about how the legal industry is not really addressing the needs of the public. And that I don't receive any what's called continuing legal education requirement. Like I don't receive any CLE hours for being involved in those listservs. I participate in committees, special interest groups, action groups, subgroups, and stuff like that. I don't receive any CLE credit for that as well. I present to Black Doctoral Network, NOBICHE, which is a national organization for the professional advancement of Black chemists and chemical engineers, or NSBE, the National Society of Black Chemists. I don't receive any CLE credit for doing that either. It is hard for non-attorney organizations to get approval for CLE credit. And so I am disincentivized from giving presentations to those organizations because I don't receive any benefit from doing so. Now, what I do receive benefit from doing is doing CLEs to other attorneys, but some of the things that I present on, other attorneys aren't interested in hearing about, like the Success Act, where we're talking about the USPTO gathering demographic information to try to address the significant gap in underrepresentation of women and minorities in inventorship process. I've asked different bar associations to give that presentation. I had one person signed up for it. And so the bar association says it's not worth the time and effort to do that. So, I could go into an understanding, explanation of CLE if you're interested. I don't know if you want to go through that.
Yeah, and so and it's so because I'm a PK-12 educator, and it sounds very similar to our continuing, to renew certifications and things of that nature. So please share a little more about the CLEs.
Okay, great. Okay, so for my state of Indiana, I have a requirement to do 36 hours of CLE every 3 years. I need to do 6 hours in a year, and there are additional requirements such as whether the type of subject matter is covering. Ethics is an example. Now, here's the problem though. There's a requirement to be in the room and to listen, but there's no requirement for me to learn. There's no requirement for me to learn areas that I practice in. I could go and pay, less than $100 for 36 CLE hours to meet my requirement and spend the entire time learning about dog law. And I've met my CLE requirement. There's no requirement for the CLE to better my skill as an attorney in intellectual property, specifically patent preparation and prosecution. Even if I go to a CLE that's IP specific, I can listen to an in-house patent counsel talk about, following his North Star and get CLE credit. But I don't have to take any tests. I don't have to show competence in preparation and prosecution of patent applications. I don't even have to show competence in the other areas of the law. I passed the bar exam, 15 years ago, and I haven't had to take another test since. So I really think that, moving forward, I hope that you do it in your industry where you have to take tests going forward. My wife is a physician and she has to take tests to ensure she keeps her license. Not so in the legal industry.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because the legal industry is run by attorneys and there's not really an incentive on their part to innovate. The only real incentive that attorneys have is to not receive a malpractice suit. And it's unfortunate that, the legal industry is not forward facing and not forward thinking and saying, well, we need to do better. The first time you hear about some sort of issue shouldn't be because someone messed up. It should be because we talked about it and we figured out the best solution for something, and everyone is able to then do a better job of it going forward.
Very interesting. Wow. So, Dr. D Hue, you acquired a PhD in analytical chemistry to make yourself more marketable to clients and law firms. This is in your words. So, has this made you more marketable? And if yes, how?
Yeah, I'd say so. I would say so. Now, of course, Dr. Porter, I did it the wrong way. Most patent attorneys get their PhD first. They go through and do all of their science or engineering classes. They're done with that. And then either they have a full career as, a scientist or something, and then they decide to go to law school and become a patent attorney. Not so. So I did bachelor's, my master's degree, law school, worked for several years, found that I couldn't compete against those that had the PhD. So I said, I can't beat them, join them, right? And so it was 2012 when I went back and did a PhD, and I defended in 2017. So the biggest change that I would see for me is that in terms of marketing, when I announced my PhD candidacy is when I started to see a shift in more chemical and life science patent work. And then once I defended the PhD and I was back to doing the work for D Hue Law full time, that's when I started to see an increase year over year in revenue until this year. With COVID, it hasn't been the same. It's not been terrible, but it has not been increasing the same way it has in years past. Now, of course, I don't know what my trajectory would have been if I had not done the PhD. I did spend a lot of time focused on the PhD and not focused on the business, but it's definitely been to my benefit. I'd say the biggest benefit for me is that my competence to understand the subject matter is never challenged anymore. So I think different than others, I think I can definitely look and say there was a period of time where I had a master's in analytical chemistry plus JD, and I still had individuals say, well, I'm not sure if you really can follow the subject matter. You're going to be able to just take this application and run with it. That never comes up anymore.
Wow. Interesting. So, Mr. D Hue, Dr. D Hue, you have earned a law degree from Indiana University, a PhD from Purdue University. Some would say you are definitely an achiever. What does it mean to you to achieve various levels of success?
Oh, excellent question. Thank you for the kind words, Dr. Porter. Both of my parents had MDs. My father passed this year, and my wife is an MD. So I'm actually the underachiever of our family. I'm not allowed to call myself Dr. D Hue around the household or with my parents around. Just joking. But no, as a Christian, I definitely, don't seek to store up for myself treasure on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal, Matthew 6. But I definitely want to use the gifts that God has given me to the fullest extent possible. And so having those degrees and the doors that it's open and just being able to show that competence to do the type of work that I do, is definitely, that's the success for me. I really don't really focus so much on the money, which I'm sure we may talk about a little later as well.
Awesome. And definitely my condolences on your losing your father.
Thank you.
So what has been your biggest failure and what did you learn from it?
Where to start? Okay. I have lots of options for you to choose from. I've got plenty of experience in this area. Okay, so I'll just list them out and let me know if any one of them strikes your interest and want to discuss further. I showed up a week late to an interview with a large pharmaceutical company because I put it in a week late on my BlackBerry at the time, right? So that didn't go over well. I still struggle with setting appointments at the appropriate time, so I automate that as much as possible now. I didn't complete the PhD before law school, like we talked about before. I didn't realize how precarious my position was at the law firm when I was there, and I should have known that. And I had an issue with my PI during the PhD program where he had requested me to draft a provisional application and he wanted it in a certain version and I didn't give it to him. And I really regret not just giving him what he requested.
So you know what, let's stop right there. That hit a chord, ding, ding, ding. Because we all know the principal investigator of your dissertation work. And I learned that very early in my program is that whatever they want, you give it to them, right? So let's stop right there and let's unfold that a bit. Talk to us a little more about that.
So let me explain myself so I can let me at least try to redeem myself.
Okay.
So I, as a patent attorney, was working with the technology transfer office for Purdue, right? And that tech transfer office and my engagement letter with them was really explicit. We direct prosecution. We tell you, we are the client. We tell you what we need you to do, stuff like that. Okay. In my role as a PhD student with my PI, I'm going after my PhD. But the fact that you have a patent attorney in your group and my PI, he gets patents, he gets like 5 or 6 patents a year, right? He's prolific. And there was something that came up in my particular subgroup, was a new invention. And he said, give it a shot, Cedric, draft it up. I drafted it up. The subgroup, all the people in my subgroup looked at my application as well as the application drafted by the attorney that represents my PI, the one that the tech transfer had hired to do the work. And they all said that mine was better. So the PI then is going to go to the tech transfer office and talk to them and say, we should be using Cedric and not this other guy, right? That's at least my thought. And he requested me to give him the Word version of my provisional application. So I assume he can make some modifications to it, stuff like that. Well, the tech transfer office did not sign off on that. And I was not engaged to work with the tech transfer office on that particular matter. And so I chose to follow the tech transfer office where I was getting work, follow their instructions, seeing that I'd already given the PI like the PDF version and all this stuff. He had everything that he needed, is what I thought. Well, lo and behold, of course it didn't go well. I still was able to rectify my relationship with the PI. And, he's one of my biggest fans, and backers to this day. But unfortunately, I never got his work. So, and I did not get to keep a fair amount of the work from the tech transfer office as well. So I kind of lost out on both ends on that one.
Wow. Lesson learned though, right?
Most definitely. But there was not really a correct answer. I think that if I had done the reverse and I had given my PI the Word version, it's very likely that the tech transfer office would have said, there's a conflict of interest here. We're just pulling all of your matters.
Wow.
They didn't pull all my matters. I still work with them to this day, and actually doing more work with them since COVID. But there was not really a correct answer on that one.
Wow. So I am such a huge advocate of pulling the next generation, the individuals that are following in our footsteps. So if you had to give advice to anyone who aspired to follow you in your footsteps, what advice would that be?
Read as much as you can on what you're seeking to do. That's first and foremost. When I knew I was leaving the law firm and starting my own firm, I went to the law library to find a book on, successful African-American attorneys. The only book I found was called The Good Black. It's actually in I can send you the hyperlink so you can put it into the show notes or whatever, stuff like that. And it was about an African-American attorney. He grew up poor. He ended up, because of his academic skill, he went to Harvard Law School, one of the best law schools in the nation. And he was at a very, prestigious law firm for several years. He goes up for partnership decision and he doesn't get it. And he thought he was supposed to get it, stuff like that. He ends up bringing suit against the law firm for racial discrimination. Talk about an eye opener, right? When you're starting your own practice and you're thinking, oh, well, I can go out here and I can follow the successes of people who have come before me. It's quite challenging. There's a desire for you to go out and get a mentor, and you really do need to add value to your mentorship relationship, and you should defer to the judgment of your mentor as much as possible. But you also need to ensure that there are mentors out there. And there are very few African-American partners at large law firms that can be your mentor. They're overwhelmed. The ABA put out a report, I think it was this year, that talked about how 8 of the 10 cities with the lowest number of African-American partners at law firms are in the Midwest. And Indianapolis is the lowest. At under 3% of all partners at law firms are African-American. And so there are a lot of African-American attorneys out there, and they're all looking for advice on how to get to where these successful few are. And so those successful few must be just torn apart, with requests to not only do their work, go out there and get business, do stuff for the firm, and in addition, mentor other African-American attorneys. I think it would be a terrible position to have to be in. So if you find a good mentor, definitely add value to the relationship, because they are stressed thin. They're stretched pretty thin.
And you speak on mentoring. Do you have an opportunity to mentor others?
I definitely do. I have a number of technical specialists that I work with. I'm working with one right now, and she's really good. She's actually starting a patent program in the United Kingdom. They have a different system than the United States does. It's much longer. It's several years. And so as part of her coursework, she's allowed to intern 20 hours a week. And so she's going to spend that time working with me. And she's up on the website. Her name is Thais. And I've known her ever since doing the PhD at Purdue. She was there at Purdue at the same time. That's how we met. And she's been excellent. Will I have a matter here or there where I use a different technical specialist so they get experience? Most definitely. And I'll give them feedback on how they do and things of that nature. But I'm not going to be able to give anyone a job. And I'm not going to be able to fill their entire work. Because, frankly, I don't have that much work. I'd like to be in a position where I had, where I could build my business and have multiple attorneys and stuff like that. But I don't really think that's in the cards anymore.
Okay. So, you definitely have reached a level of success. We've talked about your many accomplishments. What skills would you say have helped you to reach that level of success?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I have a confession to make. I married very well. I am a trophy husband. Okay, so I do well. I do fine financially in comparison to your average, American household. But I make nowhere near what another patent attorney, especially one with a PhD or a partner at a law firm, makes. I'm not terribly monetarily successful. But my success comes from not just financial things. My wife and I are not unequally yoked. She puts up with me and she has a terrific career, which I fully support. My kids know how to pray. They know how to serve their family and their friends, and they're doing okay in school. And to me, that is a lot of success. And so I feel better about that than I do about having, 3 or 4 attorneys and several $1 million in revenue for my firm.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. So what are you most proud of in your career?
Sure. Yeah. I'm proud of the 54 something patents that I've assisted my clients in obtaining as D Hue Law. The USPTO, as part of the Success Act we keep referencing, has put out reports that talk about that the number of women inventors is around 12%. And my number of inventors from the applications that I've prosecuted or the ones that I've drafted and filed, stuff like that, far exceeds that, especially for women, especially for African Americans. The reports in the USPTO has put out is not so exact as to the number of African Americans. It's harder to classify African Americans just based upon name, and they don't gather that demographic information. So they think it's like around 1%. And so mine is much higher than that, because I'd say, maybe even a third of my clients are African American. I do want to, if I can jump on here and give another public service announcement, if possible, that the reason why I want to be involved in Black Doctoral Network, and I'm happy to do this sort of interview, is because there is a great underrepresentation of women and especially minorities in patenting. And the IDEA Act, which is a current bill in Congress, recognizes that and actually explicitly states that there would be a significant increase in GDP if women and underrepresented minorities participated in the patent process at the same rate as white men. So, that has been something that I've been working on. That is something that I'm pretty proud of. And there's a backstory to that if you want to go through it.
Sure, go right ahead.
All right. Great. So several years ago, I ended up just in a chance meeting with the Novashade president, named Emmanuel Waddell of University of Alabama, Huntsville. We ended up going on a run together. At the end of the run, he says to me, "Cedric, why are there no tech transfer offices at HBCUs?" And I said, I did not even know that. I was already a member of AUTUM, which is the Association of University Technology Managers, and I promised to find out. AUTUM was receptive to my questions. They created an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee, asked me to join it. Their specific deliverable to the board was exactly my question to them. And in the year and a half the EDI committee has been in existence, we've reviewed several papers. There's a paper by Dr. Cook on violence and economic activity, which has this interesting fact in it. The year 1899 is still the peak year for African American inventorship on a per capita basis to this day, right? So that shows how violence and racial unrest against African Americans have hindered African American inventorship for several, for over 100 years, right? I mean, it's remarkable. That the year 1899 is at the end of Reconstruction, and it's before you start to see Jim Crow laws and the Tulsa, massacre and other things that occurred that just caused African American inventorship to plummet. The EDI committee, we also identified HBCUs that do have tech transfer offices. We found 5 that are members of AUTUM. And there's a dissertation from 2016 on the benefits of tech transfer offices for HBCUs. And the EDI committee is actually having a presentation with that author this coming Tuesday. So I'm looking forward to that presentation very much. And there's more that frankly, I just can't talk about right this time.
Okay, I love this. Thank you. So you have reached so many milestones. I mean, in addition to getting your law degree, your PhD, you open your own firm. How do you go about reaching your goals? What are the steps that you take to make sure that you reach your goals?
Yeah, thank you for that. But I'm definitely a work in progress, Dr. Porter. I am not sure of my goals. They keep changing. As I mentioned earlier, for a long time, I wanted D Hue Law to have multiple attorneys. I'm not so sure of that anymore. Right now, I'm just really focused on making D Hue Law as efficient as possible. There was a good book on that. It's called Traction. and I can give you the hyperlink for that as well. It breaks down businesses into marketing, operations, and finance. And so for marketing, that has meant for me involvement in committees and these groups that I've mentioned before, speaking engagements like this. Operations means creation of standard operating procedures, which I've really been focusing on since Thais is now available to take over a lot of the day-to-day drafting and preparation of applications as well as responses to office actions. I do have like a pretty brutally honest conversation I could have with you if you're interested in having that.
Quite sure.
Okay, cool. This is something that took a long time for me to come to, but I eventually figured out that I needed to have the conversations that my clients or potential clients wanted to have, instead of just trying to emphasize, you know, I'm so brilliant and wonderful and all this kind of stuff. So I had shied away from being involved in organizations and their diversity and inclusion initiatives and stuff like that, because the other attorneys I worked with, the Caucasian attorneys I worked with, didn't have to do those things. And so they were too busy working. You know, I had a conversation with a past technical specialist about a month ago, where she's working at a firm and she's next to the office to someone else who started the same time she is, Caucasian. She's African-American and the lady next to her is Caucasian lady. And she hears the Caucasian lady crying because she's so overworked. And the African-American attorney, or not attorney, the African-American lady is thinking of leaving because she doesn't have any work to do. And they're in the same group, they're working on the same matters and stuff like that. But, you know, that's what happens. There's a lot of that structural racism and maybe even, you know, gender issues out there, and we're not talking about it. It's just like with going to that bar association and telling, hey, let's talk about this underrepresentation of women and minorities, and no patent attorneys sign up. It's the exact same thing. And so I didn't want to get shoehorned into that position of being the African-American who's always talking about race and stuff like that. What changed my mind, though, was going to an organization like Autumn and finding out that there's a lot of support there. There's a lot of people who want to see, you know, work being done in this area, but they're like me. They don't know how to do it. They're not a, you know, diversity and inclusion officer. I'm a patent attorney. I don't know the first thing about, I haven't done any certifications in that area, stuff like that. But, you know, as I thought about it, and, you know, actually reminds me of a previous podcast you did with Dr. Is it Waltz, who made mention, is that how you say it?
Yes, Dr. Waltz, yes.
Yeah, Waltz. And she talked about the hard, risky work to remove racism from our culture.
Yes.
If that's what it takes, then go ahead and I'm willing to serve. And so that's really where I kind of changed direction and have really started putting a focus on for my goals, is to at least work on the structural racism that I see in my particular industry and do that part. I can't address it in other areas. I can just do it in my lane.
In your word. I love it. I love it. So what's next for Dr. Cedric D Hue?
Yeah, so thank you for that. And with our conversation talking about especially the access to the gap in access to justice issues, I want to create a legal product. You know, I want to get out there. I've been reluctant to do so just because I didn't have a lot of data as to what was needed. And so I actually created an online survey. I'd be happy to share that information, put it into the notes. And if anyone's interested in giving me feedback as to what sort of products would be best, of course, it needs to be focused on patent preparation and prosecution. I couldn't do a legal product in family law. I don't know the first thing about it. And so I'll definitely be working on that. And the second thing is I made mention of traction. I didn't make mention of anything in terms of finances and accounting. I do struggle with that just because it's just not my area of focus, but I need to work on it. There have been reports that show that solo attorneys bill only 2 hours a day and only collect about 75% of what they bill. Now, I definitely bill more than 2 hours a day, but in terms of the collection, I run into a lot of those same issues where once I get a client, especially a small client, their patent, they stop paying the bill. And so I think I'm going to have to reluctantly switch to a retainer replenishment model, wherein the client goes ahead and pays the retainer for whatever the next service is upfront. I do the work, I draw from the retainer, and then before I do the next thing, the client has the obligation to refund refill the retainer again. And so that would give me more leeway, more notice to where, I'm not going to, may not get paid going forward. I mean, I do struggle with it, Dr. Porter, because I do recognize that especially a lot of the clients that I work with will be in that position, especially the smaller clients will struggle under that model. But I think I can feel better about it if I offer that model along with some sort of a legal product, so that while they may not need as much of my service, they can still get served through the product. So that's where I'm leaning and putting it out there now, so this podcast to make sure that I actually do it.
Accountability, that's it. So how has your affiliation with the Black Doctoral Network enhanced your career?
Most definitely. I view Black Doctoral Network as a very efficient way to raise awareness with African Americans regarding inventorship. Now, being in my role where I've worked with Autumn and these organizations that are majority white, R1 institutions, where there are very few African American faculty and even few African American inventors, I have conversations where the R1 institution only has 1 or 2 African American inventors throughout the entire organization, 15,000 faculty and 1 or 2 African American inventors, right? And under that scenario, one of the models proposed to reach those African American inventors is to group a number of R1 institutions together just to get to, let's say, 20 African American inventors, right? Which seems like a lot of work to try to, take so many institutions and all of their procedures just to get to that number of African American inventors. On the flip side, you have these HBCUs, MSIs, HSIs, where there's no tech transfer office, but there's 10 times the number of African American faculty. And BDN allows me a way to reach both of those groups, the African Americans that are in the R1 institution, as well as the African Americans at those HBCUs, in one discussion, in one podcast, in one presentation, at one time, on one platform. And that is incredibly valuable. And an example of that, a number of individuals will come to me, whether they are in-house at a large company, and they'll say, we want to post this position and we want to get it in front of a lot of African Americans. Well, you can have that opportunity if you work with BDN. And that's just really straightforward and simple example of the value that BDN provides, wherein you don't have to sift through hundreds or thousands of resumes by going to an American Bar Association or American Chemical Society, where, to try to find the 1 or 2 African Americans that may meet your qualifications. You can do it in one fell swoop by, being a part of BDN. And so that to me is really valuable.
Awesome. So Dr. D Hue, I just enjoyed this interview so much. I want to thank you for joining us today. It has indeed been a pleasure. Please tell our viewers and listeners where they can learn more about you and the work that you're doing.
Sure. Thank you so much. My website is dhulaw.com. On there, you'll find a lot of information as to my patent preparation prosecution services. On there, you'll also find a link to the patents that I've been able to obtain so far as my own firm. Now, I don't post a lot of information about clients because a fair amount of it is attorney-client privileged. I will post once a patent issues, and I normally do that on LinkedIn. And my LinkedIn profile is just Cedric, C-E-D-R-I-C, and my last name, D Hue, D''Hue. Or you can even probably leave out the apostrophe. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one on LinkedIn with that name. I do also post on there the work that I do with the EDI committee, things that are relevant, that I feel work for my clients that I think is relevant, stuff like that. So I would, greatly appreciate if you would connect with me there.
Awesome. Thank you. And please be sure to stay connected to the Black Doctoral Network. We are on all social media channels. Thank you for joining us today for the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am Dr. Sharon H. Porter, and we hope you will join us again next time. But for now, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell a friend.